Welcome to the Rider's Edge podcast, a platform to share conversations about the health and wellness of horse and rider. I'm your host, Farley Schweigert. Hey y'all, it's Farley with the Rider's Edge podcast, and welcome to another edition of hashtag in the Arena 365. This week we're going to talk about core control. I've been bringing you guys along on my personal journey of being in the arena as I return to the rope pen and as I start to barrel horses or rehab them, as Charlie is still in the rehab pen because again we're approaching 60 days on Charlie's deep digital flexor tendon lesion. But 60 days doesn't equal 90 days, and my patients are thin, but he's doing well and rehabbing as well as he can. So this week it's really going to be again about the rider, and we're going to talk a lot about the core, and we're going to talk a lot about control. We talked last week about hip flexors and a lot of revelations about how tight the hip flexors can be, and often when something is tight, it can be weak at the same time, but it can also be opposite something that's weak. So typically, if we're looking at the pelvis, this is often referred to as a John de Crost syndrome. You have tight hip flexors, weak abdominals. You have tight back extensors. Your back extensors are the muscles that run along your spine, and weak glutes. So it makes an X across there. And one side of the X is weak and one side of the X is tight. Very common. That is not only common in riders, it's common in society in general, as we talked about on the episode last week. But as we're exploring everything that makes up the core, makes up the pelvis, this week we're gonna talk a little bit about just working through control of the core. We've talked about on this podcast before that the core is more than just your abdominals. It's a whole structure. It's a whole house. It is your pelvic floor. It is the top of the house is your diaphragm. Your abdominals make up the front, your back extensor, your abdominals and hip flexors actually, and your back extensors and glutes make up the back. And the different various layers within all of those muscles. So I've been working on my core, and here's the thing. I don't feel like I have a particularly weak core. I feel like I'm pretty middle of the road if you're comparing across a class of core strength among people. I don't sit on the couch and eat bonbons all day. Now, I'm not hanging upside down, pulling myself up in the gym from a rack either. But, I ride 3 to 4 head of horses a day, being active outside, doing things, and then a little bit of exercise. And over the past 2 months, in particularly, that exercise has improved. It's gained traction, and I've made a lot of discoveries in that within the core. I've learned a lot about neuromuscular control, and we'll have a confession here as we're going into this. I have Superman syndrome. I do. I think that because I've studied these things and I know these things, that I can my body's going to automatically do it, or I can think myself into automatically doing a physical motion. And I told my best friend on the phone tonight, you can't think your horse, you can't think your horse well. You can't think yourself stronger. But it's just like dealing with our horses. We get barn blind to our horses. That's why we need a team of people, a vet, a physical therapist, a good farrier, on and on. You need the same thing for yourself. You need a vet. No, you need a good set of physicians, particularly if you're having some health issues. But at any rate, you need a good general physician, and you need a good physical therapist to help you with these different things. So I've battled with that on and off my whole professional career. I really have. And it's really, the catalyst for all this was one to rope, and you can't rope a calf in two flat without some strength and having all your ducks in a row. That event is so rapid, and it's going to continue to get even faster as the event progresses and more rodeos at it. So it really came from wanting to be successful in the rope pen and knowing that I can be, and then having some pain as well. I've had some right hip pain. It creeps up when I'm roping the dummy for a long period of time, and it's creeped up several times after actually roping calves in the practice pen. So I decided to go explore my core. And I can give you fancy exercises. I can help you through turning muscles on, whether it's your abdominals, whether it is helping you learn how to move from your pelvis and move through the 3 pelvic motions. Some of the hardest things I teach people are those items, including glute sets, helping you turn on your glutes and having them fire and disassociate from the hamstrings. Boy, I have worked over the years to be able to help people with that, because that's a foundation. But because of the way our healthcare system is structured and people's priorities and lives and environment, I never get to really the middle land with them. Like, we either start at the beginning and kind of get you to the middle, and then it's up to you to, progress. And typically it hasn't been with me. If we're talking about from a traditional physical therapy standpoint, outpatient standpoint, it should be. That is definitely a flaw in the American healthcare system. We are underutilizing the physical therapist's skills and abilities due to structure of the healthcare system, priorities, environment, motivation, a lot of factors. Or I've helped people that's kind of in the mucky middle of that, get that kind of straightened out, and then we're able to get to some advanced, air quotes, sexy exercises, fun exercises, challenging exercises, and then they're done. They leave my care. So there's not been a whole lot of start to finish or getting through all of the middle layers, because this is just like training a horse again. It's going from starting them under the saddle, which is very much like doing a glute set, doing an ab set, moving your pelvis around correctly, different things like that, to all the things that happen in the middle to get them broke, to get them a handle on them. That's really the middle of where this neuromuscular control has to come in. And I'm here to tell you, it takes a lot of brain power to do that. It takes a lot of feel to do that as well. And then kind of your sexy, very sport specific, very often Instagram worthy exercises would be along the lines of starting a horse on barrels, starting a horse on cattle, really starting and continuing through that discipline specific training. So I've never really gone through all the middle with somebody else from start to finish, because I get colts or people in various stages all across the spectrum, and I've never taken the time to do that with me until now. So one of the benefits of quarantine, one of the benefits of 2020, and all of the helter skelter that there is, there's some enlightening moments and some things that have been very positive, and this is one of them. And hopefully today this will be very thought provoking for you and your core program, because it's not enough to just get the task done. It's not enough to just get, let's say, bicycle crunches completed or leg lowers or scissors or anything like that. It's the quality of that task. And that changes the ballgame. The quality of that task is my, if I'm laying on my back, am I balanced between both hip bones and through my whole back, or if because I am moving my right leg, am I pushing more weight through my right side, and I can slightly feel the left side of my lumbar spine, my left hip kind of come up, kind of curl around. If you drew a line through the middle of your body, through your nose, all the way straight down, and we're working on that axis right there, am I kind of curling around that and not putting my weight through the left side, or vice versa? So it's really, guys, it's really breaking down this core control. My favorite word for this right now is neurological reorganization. And what I mean by that is taking these simple movements, breaking them all the way down to the foundation, and getting that control correct before adding resistance, before adding speed, before adding increased sets of reps. Neuromuscular re-education, neuromuscular reorganization requires brain power. So much brain power. But it is vital to rebuilding a core, because again, it doesn't matter if you can get a plank done if your plank always makes you hurt in your SI region, makes it feel like something shifts back there, and you really push more weight through your toes and your elbows without engaging your core the way you need to, or your hips come up or whatever. It doesn't matter that you can stay in that position for a minute if it's not a quality minute and things are not firing the way they need to. So I've really been working through that, and not only breaking down those exercises, but I've been breaking down what my core control is in my shoulder exercises. For instance, I will lay on the table on my stomach and work through some right shoulder tees and rows and different exercises using one side, and I'm using no resistance. I'm making sure and concentrating on that my scapula and all my scapular stabilizers are engaged around there, because I've got to build that control as well. But right now, my huge focus is, what is my core doing while I'm using my right arm? We've talked about this before. We talk about this in my Facebook group. proximal stability leads to distal mobility. So what is, in less medical speak, trunk stability, core stability leads to limb movement. So in that movement, when I'm on my stomach, are both of the front of my hips staying level on the table? Am I bearing weight down through them as evenly as I can? For me, for a long time in this position, I felt like I was pivoting on my nose. I felt like my nose was there in the table and I was just pivoting one way or the other. Felt very unstable. And this is something that has to often be felt. It takes a highly skilled therapist that has been through a lot of this work themselves, but pays a lot of attention to detail to help you through this and to see some of those compensations that can happen. Now, all of these things, you may be sitting there going, oh gosh, Farley just apparently doesn't do Jack Taco. Well, you may be right, but for my past history and what's happened with me, this is years of compensation. Honestly, you could probably draw this back all the way back to when I used to get lunge line lessons in the English saddle. Because when you're teaching somebody to do a task, coaching them, and it's a competitive thing, it's about completion of the task, right? And then it looks correct. So, if you're sitting outside the show pen, you've heard people shout different things. Lead with your left shoulder, or different cues that can sound super confusing. It works out for that rider, and that trainer has been working through that for so long, but it can be super confusing and super super duper make you raise your eyebrow, go, what? That doesn't make any sense. But it makes sense to that pair that's been working on that. And this is not a blame game, nor is this a therapy session to be like, oh, woe is me, this is what happened to me and why I'm having to work through this. No, what I'm trying to do is share my journey, and maybe it's eye-opening because you've been on a similar journey, because I don't feel like my story is completely unique to the horse industry, whether we're talking about Western or English disciplines. But my hope is that it maybe turns on some light bulbs for you, or one of your friends that you help, or a client that you help, and you can fix these things. You can help somebody not shorten their path, and not maybe go down the same path that you did, and get better, faster, stronger, quicker, all those good things. So, gosh, I can really trace some of that compensation back to even that far. And gosh, we're talking about over 20 years ago. So we're talking about working through neuromuscular patterns that are highly ingrained. And while we could never have gone about it differently in that situation, I was a kid, frame of reference, knowledge, motivation, different things like that. But it may be that you're a trainer or you coach some people that you may see some other things to look for, and you may help bring that to their attention and, send them to Rider's Edge to get help, to help them get further in the practice pen so that they are more successful quicker in the show pen. But when I look back over my career, I can see different compensation patterns that have happened. When you are asked to ride without stirrups, without irons, and do posting and different things, your body's going to figure out how to get that job done. And it's going to repeat that pattern over and over and over again. And that's going to be, whether you have irons or not, that's going to be your pattern for how you post. And if you don't learn how to use your glutes in that motion, then it's always going to be used a different way, and those are going to continue to turn off. And as they turn off and don't have to work as much, they will get weaker. Another compensation for me has been I ride with my toes turned out slightly, and we're talking about maybe a 15-degree turn. In a medical term, we would call that externally rotated the hips. You can't tell it from an observation, like you would never really be able to tell it. How I came about finding this was analyzing barrel runs a few years ago, and I was getting behind my mare and looking through that and finding other places where I was compensating. That was one of the compensations that came up. So because I would ride like that, it would look like proper riding. I still had my heels down, my legs in position, different things like that. But I was not engaging my groin muscles or my adductors. And I was not using them and utilizing them correctly. That has been I've known about that compensation for possibly 3 or 4 years now, and I'll tell you what, that's been a hard thing to work on until I returned to the rope pen, and that's really accelerated through there because you can't ride like that out of the box. You've got to be able to grip with your adductors to take that hit of 0 to 30 right there. So that has really changed that game a lot quicker than every conscious effort that I was putting in over the last 3 or 4 years. And honestly, because I didn't have another acceleration to drive that change quicker. I was starting colts off the racetrack and ranching, and didn't have a finished barrel horse, so the catalyst was not there, so the change was a lot slower coming. And so over the past 2 months, this has really started to change, and I've between summer rainstorms and apparently there's a hurricane on the way this week. I've not been back in the rope pen for 2 weeks now, and I'm itching to get back in there to feel what has changed, because again, that catalyst for me in my core, I feel like my right side was tight and weak, and my left side was completely not functioning at all. And so I've really been working on the timing of muscles and the really thinking through things. And like I said earlier, I felt like I was pivoting on my nose when I was doing my right shoulder exercises. Well, I've added left shoulder exercises, the same ones, even though I don't rope left-handed. And, obviously most ropers, as long as you can steer a horse, you don't care what your left shoulder's doing. But for me, in my quest to have more core control, I started doing left shoulder work in order to really make that opposite side of all my core, my back muscles, glutes, abdominals, and engage as well. So really, thinking back and making things super simple, and even taking that classic Ray Hunt principle of making the right thing easy and the wrong thing hard, and really breaking it down to that rudimentary level in order to build it up. So over these 2 months, I've really felt like things have started to stabilize. I can engage things longer, and that was one of the first things to happen. it's more even from right to left. I don't feel like I am pivoting on my nose in those exercises anymore. I've even noticed that it's starting to become more automatic and less brain power to get everything started, but I still pay a lot of attention to that. So that is a little bit slow to come, but that's starting to change as well. Things I've noticed from not being on the exercise table when I mount, when I get on a horse. That's been easier. I ride anything from 14.2 to 16.1 and a couple of different ones in between. So I'm kind of on a large spectrum for quarter horses. And getting on was never hard, but it's a lot easier. I've noticed that I've felt more confident because I feel like there's a huge emotional component wrapped up in our core as well. For me, it's apparently where I store a lot of cellular memory. So our cells have memory and they remember different things. And a lot of times, if it's a memory will be embedded in the cell. If it's something that is stressful, all the way to traumatic, and I recognize that traumatic or trauma is a very loaded word and it means very different things to different people. And what one person's traumatic experience is not somebody else's sometimes. And you can't compare different traumas across the board that way. If it's a traumatic or very stressful event to you, then that's it. That's period. That there's no quantification there. So for me, growing up and things being stressful, I've figured out that one of my physical coping mechanisms was to clench my abdomen and tighten up through my abs. And so as as I've been working through some myofascial release due to having some gallbladder issues, I've been working with a therapist who specializes in that for over a year now. I've learned a lot about cellular memory. And I've learned a lot about myself through this process. And starting this process of the last 2 months of really working through some neurological reorganization of things, it's even brought to my attention some more stressful or traumatic things that have happened. And it doesn't even have to be something hugely traumatic. It can be small traumas, small stresses that compile over time. So through this myofascial release, when she would work through my abdomen, the very first time she did this, you get kind of in this hippy-dippy kind of state. And, or at least I call that. That's a term I use a lot of times. And you get into this state of consciousness where you're kind of asleep, for lack of a better term. If you've ever experienced true myofascial release, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, you may really think this is out there. But anywho, the first time I went through this treatment, I had the flashback of being in the rope pen as a kid, running the rope chute, and it was a very stressful time of my dad, trying to get ready to go to a rodeo and roping with my brother, and it wasn't going well, and Seven, the head horse, wasn't working correctly, and my brother wasn't catching, and you've been in that rope pen. Or you've been in that practice pen no matter what discipline you're doing. And I could tell you, I could vividly see the arena lights, how hot it was because it was summer and it was dusty and it was mosquitoes, and it was a very vivid image that came back to me. And that was very intriguing to me when that myofascial session was over. And I've had similar experiences in other sessions. So I know for me, and I think this is true for a lot of people, they carry a lot of emotion in their abdomen, in their pelvis, in their core. I typically say that people carry their stress in their pelvis and pelvic floor or in their shoulders. But I think it is more than that, and you can carry that emotion throughout your abdomen. If you ever follow people, authors like Amy Cuddy, who wrote the book Presence and came up with the superhero pose, the Superman pose, of going through, that superhero pose of hands on your hips, standing up tall, and all the physiological effects that happen through that for your mental and emotional state prior to doing a big event. All of this goes hand in hand. And that emotion, it gets tied into our cells. And so years later, as I'm working through things, I've been able to reconcile some things that have happened. And I don't use the word trauma lightly. But if I'm going to use a less severe word, stress, some very stressful experiences that have compiled over time, just like how our body compiles a movement pattern and ingrains that. These things become ingrained in us, and it may be something as innocent as having a bad day in the practice pen. But a lot of those bad days and similar experiences can pile up and hang out in our cellular memory. So there's some fascinating things going on with myofascial release and cellular memory. And it's a super fascinating and emerging field of study. And it's really not that emerging, but it's been something that people have not embraced as quickly as other things in the medical world, and it's really starting to gain some traction. So, working through this journey of neurological reorganization, I've worked through some traumatic things and reconciled and reorganized those things as well. And that is one thing that I believe is a reason why working through core stability, core strength, core control has not worked well for me in the past. I've been like a lot of people and been a serial exerciser. And I've had some people write some very good programs for me. Some people are very knowledgeable. And I've even followed some very knowledgeable programs, some very well-written programs that were just general programs. But I could never stick with one. Even though I work with people all day and educate them on the importance of this and that and help guide them and work through things, because the emotional and the spiritual is tied up in the physical and vice versa. And I don't know, maybe it's trice versa. I don't know if you have three things intertwined together. Maybe we'll make up some new vocabulary here. We know we've already done that on Writer's Edge, so why stop now? And I know that far as what I want to work on in different things. So I think between the Superman syndrome and cellular memory, those were some huge barriers for me on why I couldn't stick with something. And another barrier for that was the neuromuscular patterns. They were very taxing patterns. After reorganizing things, I can look back and see they were very taxing patterns for me. So the body doesn't like to spend more energy than it has to. That's a very biological thing that is set up in our systems. And so why would I want to keep pushing through that? Why, if that is that taxing for me, even though it took going through all this now to have a frame of reference for that, to understand that, why would I want to keep pushing through that? It's a hell of a lot more fun to go ride, and it's much more intriguing and less energy expensive, less emotionally expensive for me to go work on my horse than it is to work on myself. And that's common across all the disciplines. I will say for riders in the English discipline and dressage, show jumping, eventing, whatever, they typically have the physicalness of riding much more addressed in the Western discipline. They work on it more. They have more conversations about that. Some of these bigger barns have trainers and therapists on staff to work with their riders because our physicality affects our horse's physicality. So a lot of factors there. And it's just been very eye-opening to me to work through some of the emotional baggage that comes there and how that has really changed my outlook on physical activity, physical exercising without my horse, and really changed my outlook in just dealing with the world and the population. And for me right now, starting back in my day job is teaching. Starting back there, I've had a lot more patience and grace for things, and I will attribute a small factor of that to working through all of these different things. And so I'm hoping this long conversation about core control, which is a very complicated conversation, I hope I've laid it out for you in a way you could follow. And I hope I've shed some light on some different things, not only on neurological reorganization and correct movement patterns and making the right thing easy and the wrong thing hard, but on some emotional aspects of it as well. And working through those barriers, I can't tell you how much my confidence has turned around that I will continue to progress through this program. And it's even really enlightened my body because my body craves going to the table or working through the saddle, because not only am I doing exercises on the table, I've started doing core exercises in the saddle. You see that a lot when you watch the Kentucky Derby or any races. You know, you'll see when they show the jockeys getting ready in the jocks room. You'll see different jocks on these horse machines, right, where they're getting warmed up, or they're practicing through that. And if you think about how a jockey is positioned and how much they have to control their posture and how they ride in a race, it makes sense. Well, why aren't we doing that in the Western discipline? Why aren't ropers doing that? For me, I'm doing my shoulder exercises in the proper position I need to be in the saddle, and I'm doing the same thing right now that I'm working on the table. It's not about the shoulder exercises. Yes, I am paying attention to how my scapula moves and that things are firing and I'm going through the correct motion there. But right now I'm worried about, is my core stabilizing correctly through this distal motion? I have a lot of slack in my sport cords right now, and barely any resistance, because it is all about, am I maintaining the correct muscle firing, the correct stability through there, and then how long can I maintain that? It's going to need to be longer than 2 seconds. We can focus on quality of task in a stationary saddle with sport cords, and we can change some different factors around there, that when we go back to the practice pen and we have 40 different things thrown at us, we can rely on that quality that we've instilled in the practice saddle, the exercise table, and focus on the completion of the task, of catching the calf, of running the fastest pattern, of loping the most correct circle. So it's a building block thing. And I will tell you that I have found things to not stabilize well in the saddle that I've had to backtrack on the table and work through on the table a lot more, and then go reassess in the seated position on the saddle. And again, we're not, particularly in the Western discipline, we are not utilizing working through those positions as much as we should. And not at all. And you don't have to have the fancy horse machine that the jocks do. Get a simple saddle rack and pull your saddle that you ride in all the time down. And it's easy for me to give you the visualization of a roper working through shoulder exercises. You can work through the same set of exercises if you're running barrels, if you are working on your trail pattern, on your horsemanship. If you are in the show pen, you can work through the same thing, because the whole principle is I'm stressing the core and stabilizing it by moving one of my limbs. And like we've talked about in this podcast before, our foundation in riding is at the pelvis. So we're putting our body in a slightly different position than other sports. And so why aren't we practicing that way? Why aren't we working through that as well? And then we go add other factors of being on the horse and completing the task, whether it's loping a large fast circle or a small slow, or getting a certain pattern around the cones correct. And then we can go worry about completion of task there. And I think you'll get a lot further along in your sessions with your trainers. You'll get a lot further along with your horse, and you'll reach your goals faster. So I hope this has really helped you and just kind of been like, that was a long winding road, Farrells, but it sure was eye-opening. The core is a place, it's our foundation. It connects our upper body to our lower body, but there are a lot of factors going through there. For me on my journey in the arena, it has been about neurological reorganization, changing movement patterns that are actually decades old at this moment in time, years to decades old. Now, that's not going to change overnight, and it's not going to change in just 2 months, but I'm a lot further along now than I was. And I'll be a lot further along when I give you an update in 2 months than I am today. And I'll have a lot more insights that'll happen. This journey has been about dealing with some cellular memory. And by dealing with that cellular memory, I've been able to heal some older wounds. I've been able to understand why I react to certain situations the way that I do, or different thought processes. And that in turn is really changing how I interact with people and how I react to situations. And while there's been a lot of growth for that in my life from very different factors, a lot of them external up to this point in the last 2 years, this has been an internal factor, and it's been a game changer as well. So getting that control, that reorganization, working through the emotional stuff, it's allowed an exponential amount of forward motion. And that is a lot further in the journey than just getting a plank done for 1 minute or completing 100 sit-ups. It's gonna be a game changer for me. And I hope that this conversation at least ignites some thought process or some conversations and becomes a game changer for you. This is a lot of deep and integral things that happen in the core. And so if you feel like this is something that you need to work on and you don't know where to start, message me. You can go to writersedgetherapy.com and message me there, and we can set up even a video consult and help you on your journey through this. This is something that not everybody works through. This is something that not everybody gets the chance to work through for various different reasons, and I think it is a game changer for you and your goals with your horse. And it's not something that the average therapist is going to be able to help you through. It's going to take somebody who has been in the trenches and has the knowledge to get you there. And that's a very special combination. So, like I said, if this is something that you need to work on personally, no matter your discipline, no matter your event, message me at writersedgetherapy.com. I'll be happy to connect with you. This is something that we can work through a program virtually and help you really get on your way. As always, I appreciate your attention to these conversations. I love this little passion project of mine with the podcast. Let's see how many P's I can put in one sentence. Have some great conversations coming up in the next few weeks that will further horsemanship conversations and just keep pushing all of this stuff forward. So thank you for your time. And as always, I will see you down the road. Thank you for listening to Writer's Edge Podcast. For show notes and other thoughts, head over to writersedgetherapy.com. If you would like to stay connected and continue the conversation, head over to my free Facebook group, Writer's Edge Health and Wellness for Horse and Rider. Thanks for continuing the conversation, and as always, I will see you down the road.